Welcome back, friends. I am so excited today to be with my dear friend, Meagan Baldwin. I feel very honored to call you a dear friend. We have not been in each other's lives very long.
No,
And
we haven't.
what is so cool about this journey and all this work that we do is when you meet humans, you connect in a way that is deeper really quickly. And I love that about our story. And so Meagan and I met at the Trauma Informed Educator Network conference a year ago.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, next week, like almost a year. Yeah.
Yeah, right at a year ago. And I think our connection is based on our Western living.
Right.
Meagan lives in Kansas and I am Wyoming, Colorado. And I think most of the people at the conference are like, what are those states? Where are you? We don't understand. Like we fly over
Right.
this, right?
Do we need to put up a map? Maybe we need to put up a map.
Yeah, I think so. And so I do think that's just a piece where we just get culturally each other a little bit differently than everybody else around us. And so there's a million reasons I'm drawn to you, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about who you are, what you do, all the good stuff. And then we'll chitty chat.
Sure. So, I am a mom and to two 20-somethings now. The youngest just turned 20 about a week ago, so that's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm a long time public educator, so I've been in public education like 25 plus years. I taught general ed and then I taught special ed, and then I found myself kind of in a interesting spot of creating a space for where our kids and our adults could in my school could come to regulate. And so that was my past 5 years. I was with a very large school district for 18 years, and I decided to make a change. So I resigned that position and I'm moving on to a smaller school district. So I'm excited about that. So that's my main gig. That's the gig that pays the bills. But my passionate gig is that I am a BAVX practitioner and trainer. So those of us that don't know what BAVX, so it stands for Balance, Auditory, Vision Exercises. And it's a series of exercises that have been a long time in creating, probably close to 30 years. Bill Hubert started working on those exercises. And we use sandbags and racquetballs, and we have patterned, repetitive, rhythmic movement that, some of the exercises are some of them that we started with 30 years ago, but it's always changing and always evolving. We're always learning something new and always trying something new. It's classroom friendly, it's school friendly. And yeah, that's where my energy lies. When I get into a gym with, 30 people and we spend 2 days together, and by the end of 2 days, we're all in sync and our bodies are all moving at the same speed and our nervous systems kind of attune and intertwine. That's where my real love falls.
Yeah. So this is 100% one of the reasons I fell in love with you is because you are doing this work in a public education system. You're realizing that the structure of what we've always done in education doesn't work for all people. And
Right,
and that
exactly.
we have to teach from a nervous system level. And one of the questions I get consistently from my audience and from the educators that I train and I talk about nervous system is like, how do we do that in the classroom? What do we do? Do we have time for this? How do you implement it? And your work is the answer. Like it's one of the answers, right?
It
And
is
so,
one of the answers. Yes.
yeah, so just speak a little bit to that because you have this beautiful way of articulating how pattern repetitive activities really belong in an educational setting.
Right. So it's kind of interesting because like BAVX, when it was first created, when Bill first started working on it, he had two major backgrounds. And one background was he was a first grade teacher at the time, and his other background was in martial arts. And so he took kind of the structure of martial arts and he was trying to figure out, okay, like how can I provide movement at that point? How can I provide movement to my students? And he started thinking about it. And what he did was he did some observations and he looked at his students, and the students who were struggling academically were also the students who could not walk on a balance beam, or they couldn't stand on one foot, or they couldn't like stand on a chair and jump off and land on 2 feet. He found that those are the same kinds of students. And, 30 years ago, we weren't talking about, brain science. We weren't talking about nervous systems. But what he was really trying to do is he was trying to create create more physicality in these kids so that they could function in life. And now, fast forward 30 years, now we have the brain science and the neuroscience to go with that says patterned, repetitive, rhythmic movement helps to calm the limbic system, or it helps to calm that stress response system. So that's kind of the lens we've been looking at it now through about 5 to 10 years is kind of where we've been going with that. So in a classroom, you can use sandbags, you can use racquetballs. We always try to get a midline cross, whether it's front to back or side to side. We provide a way to move our feet and our hands together. We can do that individually, we can do it in partners, we can do it in small groups. And what people have to realize is that BAVX is not based on having internal rhythm yourself. It's not based on being athletic. It is based on precise physical technique. And once you learn the technique, then the rhythm comes from the technique. And the technique is simple enough that anyone can learn it. So it makes BAVX very accessible to classrooms, because within 2 days of training we can get those techniques, but then you can take those simple techniques and the very simple ones, teach them to volunteers or to paraprofessionals or to any other adults that you have in your classroom. Or in an elementary school setting, you might teach them to the older kids, and the older kids work with the younger kids. It's just one of those things that is super accessible to everyone.
So let me ask this question, because I think it comes up a lot. Is this a strategy or a technique you use with kids when they're regulated, when they're dysregulated? If they're having a meltdown, do you say, hey, grab a bean bag? If they're, their stress response system, I always say your stress response system is like a rubber band. The more stressed you are, the more stretched you are. Where do you use this in the stretching of the rubber bands?
Right. I think that varies from kid to kid and human to human. Because what we have to realize is that we all have our own individual recipes for what regulates us. And so you have to know your kids, and you have to know the people that you're working with. It can be used if you're kind of on that edge of meltdown stage, and you can still communicate with the person that you're working with. If you're to the point where your communication is gone, then this isn't a time to use BAVX.
Yeah.
But it's really nice I spent a lot of my career in the past 10 years or so being very reactive in a school setting. Like, we were always reacting to behavior. And in BAVX is something that we can use on the front end. We can use it as a strategy to prevent dysregulation.
Yeah, love that. So one of the strategies that you've used is you have a room, and I want you to talk about your room. If you're
We did, yeah. We called it the reset and return room.
Yep. Okay. Tell us all about it.
Boy, that was a long journey. Like, that was 5 years. There's hundreds of things we tried that didn't work. And then there's, dozens of things we tried that did work. But we set that room up in the idea of Bruce Perry's regulate, relate, reason. So, students would come in. Let's just say we had an issue of dysregulation where we weren't able to catch it in time, and the student became dysregulated. So then they would come into the room, and if it's somebody we had seen before, we already knew the tools, because they had explored and they had tried and they had decided which of these work for me. Is it the rocking chair? Is it the swing? Is it the tent? Is it the crash pad? So we had already kind of made up that recipe for them. I always like them to get some kind of large body regulation, whether it's walking or rocking or swinging, something like that, before we move into kind of a fine motor regulation, which is where they would like get something for their fine motor, whether it's coloring or using fidgets or whatever. So that was the regulation part of that. Also remembering that we never left a child alone. We were always there for co-regulation. And sometimes that meant sitting with the child. Sometimes that meant backing off. We had to always figure that out. Again, individual kids, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, but in the end, you'll get the payoff.
Yeah.
And then, so then we would move after the child was regulated, then we would move to the reason or the relate stage. That stage, we would move them to like a small table where we had games, or maybe we were coloring together. That's where we reestablished our communication between the adult and the child. Are we ready to problem solve this? And then we would get to the reason stage, and we would then be able to problem solve what happened, who was affected, and what do we need to do to make it right.
Yeah.
So that's just one example. We also had kids and sometimes adults that took regular scheduled breaks. So again, trying to get ahead of that behavior. Like if we know that, we have a kiddo who regularly becomes, has struggles from 10:15 to 10:25 because that's the beginning of math. Well, then how about we get ahead of that from at 10:10, and then we can come regulate, and then we can slide you in kind of after that transition piece has already taken place.
Love that. There's so many parts of this that are fascinating to me. I am sure you have experienced this as well. So I'm just going to ask for your beautiful insight. How often do you think about emotional regulation during a work day at a school?
Oh, like every 30 seconds. Like
Yeah.
every time you have these days, every time you have an interaction or you hear an interaction, you're thinking about what is the state of that person's nervous system, whether it is a child or an adult. And then after you think about these things for a while and you start to notice, like that's the biggest thing I think people start to notice the states of other people's nervous systems, then you start to predict it. And then you start to problem solve in your head. Okay, what can I do or what needs to happen, so that this adult can get what they need and this child can get what they need, so that we don't further damage any relationships that we have. Like that's something that always kicks into me is what do we need to do in this moment to preserve the integrity of the relationship between either these two adults or these two children or the children and the child and the adult. As you do this work, you start to think about those things as you notice the regulation or emotional states of other people.
Yeah, I love that. So we're going to have lots of members in our audience, some that are going to be doing this work like you and I have been doing this work for decades, for a very long time, others who are just very at the beginning of this journey. And so one of the questions I get a lot from people at the beginning of the journey is, how in the world does this impact learning? Like my job as an educator is to teach. I'm not here to play. I'm not here to parent. I'm not here to do all this. So talk to me in your own words, expert public educator, about how this sort of work, regulation, emotional regulation, understanding those emotional dynamics really does impact the academic component that education is.
I think the first thing I have to do before, and I will answer that question, but the first thing I have to do is I have to recognize our public educators, and I have to recognize that the past 3 years have been like nothing we have ever experienced before. And I also want to recognize that we as educators are often, the system has conditioned us in a way that if we can just do things faster, if we can give them more content in a faster way to increase academics, that is going to solve our problems. And that's a systematic issue. And I mean, I've talked to educators from all over the country, and I often get this very sort of similar thing, like, when am I going to have time to deal with regulation? Well, here's the deal, is that, if our cortex, the learning takes place in our cortex, which is the, highest level of our brain, and the rest of our brain has to be regulated and opened up in order for us to get there. And if we're not, if we can't get to the cortex, we can talk and teach those kids all day long and they're not going to get it. And unfortunately, what that often ends up is we end up with educators who are being blamed and shamed for their kids not getting the academic content, when in fact, it's the fact we need to spend time in that regulation piece in order to get to the cortex, which is where all of our academic learning takes place. And that's where we have to be able to get there in order to be able to stick. If we are not in a regulated state and we can't get to our cortex, whatever we're getting them is not going to stick. And then that frustrates us. And then that's hard on us.
Just a cycle. So there's so much in what you're saying that's important to unpack. I think educators are heroes, and you just keep showing up because you love kids. You're underpaid, you're exhausted. Many of you are working in environments that are not supported. And I love that you're honoring that. And I want to acknowledge that as well, because you are heroes. And Megan, I've had the privilege of knowing you over the last year and knowing how brutal it is. Like, you have brutal days, right?
It is brutal.
Days.
It can be very brutal.
And I think that's such an important piece of this conversation, because while we're here because we love kids and we want to do right by kids, this is also really important for adults.
Very much so.
Part of what's happened over the last 3 years is it's hard for us to get into our cortex because we're not regulated. Are you seeing that with your colleagues, with the educators you talk across, across the United States?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is the first year that I've heard, from colleagues who might, they might come down and say, you know what, Meg, like I've never said that to kids ever. Or, we're also finding a lot of, not only are our educators struggling, but our educators, like wider families and support systems, are struggling. So, it might be that like our educators they might have a little bit of, disruption in like their immediate family, but they would often have these wide support systems. They might have aunts or uncles or friends. And it just seems like those wider net support systems are also struggling.
Yeah. Dysregulation, regulation, it's very systemic.
It is. It absolutely is.
Right. Yeah, and it's absolutely is. I say a lot of things like, what's regulating? Turn off the news. Right. And I mention that because we are impacted by so much of the information that we're getting all the time. And it does impact these systems and these communities. So as you're thinking about your journey of 20 plus years in public education, with this twist of really understanding regulation, really supporting kids and families, really supporting your colleagues, what are like the top 3 things you wish every person if you could share anything that you've learned, what is it? What are the top?
Anything that I've learned. Okay, so number one might not be super popular, but I'm going to go with it anyway. So number one is, for educators in general, is that you have to know that you cannot self-care yourself out of these systematic things that are going on in our education system. Like, where you are not going to self-care, your way out of the constant assessment protocols that keep coming your way. It's not going to happen.
So a yoga class a week, walking to work.
Right. Exactly.
Sure you're exercising, getting the private, that is not going to solve the systemic issues of what we're doing. Got it.
Correct.
Correct. Maybe unpopular, but a very important thing to say.
I know, like, oh man, super unpopular. Okay. So then, number 2 would be, doing some real work on your states, your nervous system, and really knowing what your triggers are, because we all have them. Like, what are those things that just send you over the edge? And it doesn't matter how small they are. Like, for me, it's people leaving random pieces of paper on my desk. Like, don't leave me a note, just send me an email. That's my thing. Like, just don't do that anymore. So understanding your nervous system, what are your triggers, and what are the things, if you feel what are the sensations in your body that kick in? And then also being able to say, you know what, right now, I can't do this. I cannot, I don't have my system, it can't regulate with yours right now. And so I need to step out and have somebody step back in. So that's kind of a combo number 2, like knowing your limits, know your limits, know what regulates yourself.
I think I just want to say a couple of points about that. I find that the more we take adults down the journey of what's regulating, they're
Mm-hmm.
naturally doing it in their life, right? I always give the example, I'm in the army. When I went into the army, I'd have to sleep in all these weird places. I need a heavy blanket to sleep. Now I take my blanket with me to the army. People are
Mm-hmm.
like, are you bringing your blankie? Yes, I'm a grown woman with my blankie. Like, I
Of course
need
I
that,
am.
right? Like, that is a regulation thing. I
Right.
live part-time in Wyoming. It's super windy. In order for me to be happy here, I need a water feature of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it has to offset. So once you know what it is that really provides that safety, connection, regulation, you just increase it, right? We dose
Right.
it differently at different times in our life. I love, love, love that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's super easy to get curious about. Like, to me, this is
Yeah.
it's one of the cheapest. I always ask educators, how many of you spend money on bulletin boards? And they all raise their hand, right? And I'm like, regulation's actually cheaper. Like, when you learn what is that you need, whether it's different smells, different lighting,
Right.
work, like, it really makes sense. So I love that you're saying that. And I really love that you're giving people permission to say, I don't have the capacity to do this right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't mean I don't have the capacity ever.
Right. It means I don't have the capacity right now.
Yes, yes. Okay. I just had to acknowledge that. So, okay, I can't wait to hear
Awesome. All
number
right. So
three.
then number three, and this was one that I had never really thought about before, but once it was pointed out to me, it became very, very helpful. So creating for yourself some kind of ritual from transitioning from your work day to your home life.
Yep.
Um, what I used to think mine was my drive home. I make a commute every day of about 40 minutes, and I used to think that that was my ritual. My ritual, that is not my ritual. Well, I mean, I still do it every day, but my ritual is when I walk in the house, I have to wash my hands.
Oh.
That like is the transition from being
Mm.
at work to being at home. And like I thought to myself, well, and when my kids were babies, that's just what I did like for their health. But
Mhm.
now that I think about it, and I tested it a couple of times, like, is that really a regulation strategy? And it absolutely is, because if I walk into this house and somebody needs me for something like instantly, my nervous system just starts to get kind of itchy and kind of like prickly. And I'm just like, whoa, hold on, I gotta go wash my hands. And then once I wash my hands, then I can make that transition and I can take on, you know, like whatever is next. So that would be my third number one, my number three thing.
I love that. And there's something about the washing of, like, I'm washing away this piece and I'm
Mm-hmm.
present and ready for what this piece needs to give me.
Right.
Such good stuff in there, Megan. I appreciate you for so many reasons. One of my favorite things about you is your authenticity and your candor. You
Thank you.
have the ability to make humans feel safe, and you genuinely show up, and you're one of the funniest people I know. And so I really want to say that because there's a few things that come together. I always tell people we don't feel safe with people until we play with people.
Mm-hmm.
And you are a player, like, in the best ways. You love to play and you create that safety, and you just model this in a way that is super helpful. And I'm really excited about your new adventure, because
Me
you're going
too.
to be in a setting where administratively all of this stuff is built in, right?
Yes, yes, I'm super excited about that. I'm making a transition into a smaller elementary school with a principal who I've known for some time. And the culture, like the building, the culture of the folks that work in that building is just, it's amazing. Like when I officially announced that I was coming their way, I got text messages from these people that I don't even know for
Love
probably
it.
2 weeks straight, just like welcoming me to the building. And I think that that is going to be a very refreshing start. I'm going to be doing much the same kind of work, but kind of building from zero as far as, you know, getting like a reset and return room together. I think I'm going to have a lot more time to like work with teachers also as far as regulating their nervous systems and helping to figure out like what's regulating to the kids in their classrooms. So I'm super excited about that.
I love that. And I mentioned that for a couple of reasons. One, there are going to be educators that listen to this who feel like they're an island and they
Yeah,
feel like they're
that's
alone.
hard.
And it is hard. And there's a couple of things to that. One, you're not alone. There's tens of thousands of people on this journey.
Hmm.
They may not just be in your school, right? We're
Right.
part of a wonderful community, the Trauma Informed Educators Network community. We've gone to several conferences where we've been able to connect and meet and know that there are other people out there. So that's one thing I would say, just know you're not alone. Two, if you feel alone in your school, continue to be the pioneer,
Hmm.
right? Talk
Yeah.
about that. What's it like to be a pioneer doing this work when you feel alone? Because I imagine you had that
Right.
experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes there were days where I just felt like I was like the lone ship. What's it like? Well, it feels lonely sometimes. But on that, how should I best describe this? Okay. So if the adults in your building are struggling, take a look at your students
Mm,
because there will be students who you use these strategies with that will start to respond. And
mhm.
if the adults can't be your people, maybe your students can be your people.
Mm,
So that would be one thing. And then once the students start to respond, you can start to point that out to the adults, and you're gonna find one person. Like you're gonna find at least one person who is curious, and that's all they need to be.
yeah,
They just need to start with the curiosity.
love that.
And it only, two people makes a meeting, right? And two people makes a committee, right?
Yeah.
It only takes two.
You're,
So,
you're such an educator.
right?
Yeah,
Two. That's all you got. That's all
I
you
love
have
it.
to
And
have.
committees, everything happens in committees. I just think the power of modeling is super important. And
Yes,
so
absolutely.
we often say, when you know better, you do better. And
Yes.
when you know this information about nervous system stuff, you can't unknow it.
Right.
You can
Exactly.
never unknow it.
Exactly. And and then you have to work to create that feeling of safety so that you can collaborate with each other. Like I had folks in my building they were at the level of curious, and you would hear them talking with students, and so you would start to hear just little bits of like a restorative conversation. You might just hear like one or two words, and you're okay, well, those are one or two words that they're using now that they weren't before.
Love that.
And then they'll start to show up at your door, and they'll be like, oh, and sometimes they'll just come to talk, and that is what creates that level of safety. And then when they have something big that comes up, then you have that relationship, and then you can kind of problem solve that and work that out together. I had a couple of folks in my building that, oh man, they were working really hard. I mean, and over the years they just learned, so much, but they'd still come and go, you know what, Meg, I have no idea what to do with this. But then we would be able to, and I would say, well, I don't know either, but like, let's come up with, first, do no harm. Let's figure that out. Like, we're not going to do any more harm, but what can we do?
Love that. And that's just it. I don't think you have to know everything to
No, you're
kind of
never going to
thing.
know everything.
No, and these are humans. Humans show up with all sorts of wild and crazy stories.
Right, which is, one of those systematic pieces that we're not great at in public education, is thinking about each student individually. We very, very much want them all to learn to read from the one curriculum. Like, wouldn't just how much easier that would be,
Oh,
if I just gave everybody the same curriculum and we taught it and they learned it.
yeah. Well, and that brings me to where we're at right now. I mean, part of the reason for doing this series is I know a lot of humans who are all speaking the same language,
Mm-hmm.
and you all deliver it differently.
Yes.
And we need everyone using their voice, right? Every
Yes.
single person adds value to this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and we do it in different ways. I know you and I come from rural-ish areas,
We do.
and we have colleagues in very urban cities,
Mm-hmm.
and we see the world very differently and very similarly.
Yes.
All are important. And so I so appreciate your time today. Do you have any
Thank
last
you.
thoughts you want to leave our audience?
Um,
It's okay if you don't, but I wanted to just give you the opportunity if you do.
I would just reiterate that piece of if you have, start to be curious. If you have to start somewhere, just start with curiosity, and do some poking around and see if you can find one thing that you're super curious about, and then just go from there. Start with curiosity.
Love it. I often tell most of the people in my life, curiosity is one of the best strategies you can have. Curiosity in any relationship, in your marriage, in your relationship with your children, with educators and students, like curiosity is huge. And if we come from a curious place, then we usually land where we need to. So how do people find you, Meg?
Yeah, so you can find me on social media. You can find me on Facebook. So I'm my personal page is just Meagan Baldwin, and my BAVX group is Heartland BAVX LLC. You can find me there. You can also find my website, which is www.heartlandbavx.com, and from there you can find me on Instagram or Twitter, or email. Email is good. Text message. I will also often answer a phone call. So
do not leave her a note. Give her.
Yeah, please don't leave anything on. Well, okay, if you want to send snail mail, that's fine, but like, don't leave me stuff sticking in places that I'm just, and especially if you're going to leave it there, make sure I know who left it.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. Thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, I deeply appreciate your time. I love you so much. I'm so excited for what the universe is bringing to you.
Me too.
And your gifts. I'm just glad I get to share your gifts because they're really important, Megan. So thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Bye.